Everybody has some sort of wisdom in this life, right?
Apparently.
Hey, man. If it's good, like I said, eat the meat, spit out the bones. Like, glean what you can and throw away the rest. Yeah, so we got the co-host of the Remnant podcast.
Yes, sir.
So what's your side of the story? It seems like you were the mastermind behind the whole thing.
I wouldn't say the mastermind.
Okay, okay, okay.
So the idea for the podcast that came around way a while. Actually, me and Louis were talking about it on the ride over here. It came along a long time before I even met Louis, and I didn't know what it was gonna look like. I didn't know what it was gonna sound like. I didn't know the structure. I didn't know anything about anything, bro. Like when I'm telling you, I didn't know anything about anything. I bought like this cheesy like mixer with these like nasty cables. Pastor
What?
Shalom.
Because the dude sold you at Guitar Center or what? He
No,
was like, you're
actually,
gonna
it was
need
on
this, and
offer
that.
on offer. But I was just like YouTubing like how to start a podcast, and they're like, you just need this, and this. So I was like, all right, cool. So I want to go buy that stuff, and it just didn't seem like something in me. I'm like, now that I mean, hindsight being 2020, I know that it was just God saying like, no, this is not, you're not supposed to do it by yourself. So I like kept hesitating, kept like just procrastinating on doing the podcast, and then me and Louis linked up, and we just developed our friendship. And then one day after the men's group Saturday morning, we are just swapping stories, and I'm like, this is it. Like this is what we're talking about because in the men's group we're talking about stuff that men generally don't talk about because they're scared of vulnerability because through culture we're taught that vulnerability is a weakness when that in actuality is a strength.
And culture, you mean like the Mexican culture?
Mexican
Or pretty much just
culture,
men culture, right?
men culture,
Yeah.
United States culture, like if you're vulnerable, you're weak.
Hmm.
And so we're swapping stories and I'm like, dude, let's do a podcast. And so then me and Louis were like, okay, let's record like this. And that turned out not so well. It turned out garbage and we lost some footage and we redid it.
It
And then,
takes a couple tries. Like you just think you're
right.
gonna set up a camera and that's
And
it.
that's it. And just talking, it's
Just
going to come
talking. That's
together.
it. It's gonna be a hit.
And so then we invested into some equipment and yeah, we got blessed with the studio. And then we recorded that, and they were like, "Man, the lighting's really crappy in here. We need to do something about that." And then we got some lighting, and you know, what about the thumbnails, reels, and social media? And I'm like, there's a lot more to doing a
Oh
podcast than
yeah,
just
dude.
recording and throwing it up there and making seeing if somebody gets it. But for us, it's like which I love about Louis is like he just ran with it, not knowing what the full picture was because I didn't even know what the full picture was.
He was just ready to go.
Yeah,
I
and
respect
like
it.
let's do it. I was like, all right, cool. And so as it started to develop, it was like, man, this is the stuff that a lot of people don't get to talk about at church. A lot of pastors, for the majority of the pastors, don't get a chance to talk about it from the platform, from the pulpit, because they really don't have the time to unpack it for everybody all at once.
It's not a 5 minute conversation or a
Right.
short tangent, right?
And
It
so
requires thought, response, because everybody's story is different.
and it's just unpacking, like unpacking these experiences, these feelings, these this the wisdom that you get and don't have,
Hmm.
and trying to figure out like how do I go about it. So that's where that came from.
What's the thought process to go in behind the topics? Like one of the recent ones was you had your pastor on, but
All
I
right,
think the first one was or second one was church hurt, right?
yes, sir.
Yeah.
No, that was our third episode was church hurt.
Third one, okay.
Our number two episode was the Lord told me it was you, or you're the one for me, and that one that was pretty fun because I got to share me and Ali's story on that one. But
So how to so this is meaning like God told
like God told me you're the one for me. You're gonna be my spouse.
is that what God told you?
God told her because she was apparently had a very specific prayer, and
She had a vision.
she. Oh, dude, did she ever?
Look
Okay,
at you over here fulfilling
yeah,
fulfilling dreams, man.
there you go.
Here we are.
talk about prayers coming to pass. You know what I mean? But
She knows she hit the jackpot. You can say it.
I hit the jackpot on that one.
Yeah, yeah. No, that
Uh,
likewise.
so
My wife.
the there really, I don't want to say there isn't a thought process, but the majority of the topics that we have come up with that we talk about is through prayer.
Hmm.
And it's like allowing the Holy Spirit just to work through and like, okay, we got to talk about this, like our experiences with that, or even if we're on a learning curve, like, oh, this is what we've been learning, and just taking it from there.
And you said you guys have people coming up to you, and because me and Louie were talking about it, is like through our experiences, other people can learn, and vice versa. We can learn
Right.
from other people. But again, if you're not like making the time to talk to somebody,
Right.
and it's not necessarily like having to be at a church or talk about like church things, just
Right.
like life in general, right? Like
Well, it's a twofold.
look up from your
So
yeah.
it's not just the church thing, but being able to apply what we learned through the Word of God in the practical sense.
Right.
Because we could throw all this Christianese behind it.
What does it look like?
Yeah, like, oh, well, the Bible says, "Thou shalt seek and shalt found." Yeah, that's great. It's true. But how am I supposed to seek? How am I supposed to seek it when I find it? How do I know that I found it?
I don't know. It's not just me coming up with whatever I
Right.
want to hear or somebody else's outside voice.
And that's what our pastor had mentioned in our last episode, that is through discipleship. What does discipleship look like? And to a certain extent, that's what we've seen happen with is happening with this podcast is an extension of discipleship, because now it's like, hey, I was thinking that, but you said it out loud, so that makes me feel better because I'm not the only one thinking it. Like, yeah, it's true. And so, like, for me, I've had a lot of people come up to me and talking about our other episode, which was forgive and forget. They're like, oh, that forgiveness one, man, that one really touched me. I was like, yeah, man, like, I'm now like, oh, it's like it's all God, and thank you for that. We really do appreciate it. But I know I've heard Louis say it before too. It's like that's what gets us going, like, let's make another one, let's make another one.
That's
And
how you know, like you're taking a step in the right direction, right?
right, or just floating in the right direction.
Yeah.
Because it's like people say, oh, you're going deeper with God. Yeah, that means when you go deep, if you go deep enough, you're not gonna feel the ground. You're just gonna be floating, and it almost feels awkward because you're like, am I going in the right direction or not? But you have to have the faith to believe that God is taking you in the right direction. You know what I mean? And that's what we've seen with this thing. We've seen with the podcast, is like it's going in the right direction.
So how do you fit this into? You have a wife and a son, right? Or a wife and a kid.
Right.
Like, how do you fit this into? It is work. So, what does this look like? And
It's
is your wife down with it?
100%. There isn't anything that a man should be able to do that his wife isn't backing him up 100%. So before we even actually started recording or anything, I had sat down with Allie and like, this is where the Lord's leading us. But I didn't know time management, that's the second thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you sit down and have the conversation with your wife, like, hey, this is where the Lord is leading us. Second thing, time management. What is it going to look like? Well, it's like it just explaining that, okay, this is the date that we're going to record. We're going to start recording at this time. I don't know what time we're going to be done. So you got to make sure as a man that you take care of your stuff before that time comes where you have to go put in work for that thing.
Right.
I know in general in culture, it's like, oh, you got to grind it out. Like everything else goes to the side. Like, no, you got to grind it out. Be a husband, be a father, be present, and, and do X, Y, and Z at the same time.
It's a juggling act, right? Trying to do
It,
everything at once. Do you ever feel like
it's balance.
yeah, balance?
Balance.
Do you ever feel like it's out of balance?
Of course.
Yeah.
I'd be lying if I told you it wasn't off of
That's what I'm trying to figure out, man. Some people
I
act like they got it
I
all
could sit
together.
here and tell you, like, everything's perfectly balanced. I have a perfect amount of time with my wife, a perfect amount of time with my husband. No, it ain't that kind of podcast. Perfect amount of time with my son, and I'm grinding it out. Like no, it's imperfect. That's what makes it perfect, because in it being imperfect, God works through it all,
Hmm.
and it's it's how can I say, it's a beautiful thing because it's a journey.
Right.
It's a whole journey in itself that makes it imperfect, but makes it balanced all at the same time.
Heck yeah, man. What's next? How do you guys? Are you just gonna see what happens as you go along? Do you guys have like a little progression? Or
Well, it's definitely gonna progress. What direction it's gonna go in? It's gonna go big. How it's gonna look like? I have no idea. When it is gonna happen? I have a feeling it's gonna be soon, and it's just gonna keep going the way it's going, man. Like until God says stop, we'll stop.
and I don't know if I asked you, but what led to seeking out another church?
Um,
What goes in?
if you listen to our church hurt podcast,
Mhm.
I kind of revisited some of the stuff that me and Ali kind of went through,
Uh-huh.
which led us to seeking out another church.
Okay.
And it wasn't that we ended up at City Reach.
Give me the synopsis, or give us the synopsis of
So
what do you define church hurt as?
being being let down, being hurt in the sense where you're emotionally hurt because you the people that you thought were gonna have your back as far as like leadership
Hmm.
didn't in the moment that you needed them the most. So in that one moment where you fall short and you really are hoping that that those people that are leading you, teaching you, are gonna lend their hand to pick you back up and to say, "Now figure it out," and then come back. That's the part that hurt. That's the part that was like, "Oh man, what do we do now?" But we didn't just up and leave like right away. For us, it was a lot of praying, but we did feel that that season was coming because in our transition time from our old church to the church that we're at now, it was a whole year.
Hmm.
It wasn't just like because we didn't want to leave on an emotional term. We didn't want to leave just because you're like, nah, bump this. They don't want us here no more, so we're gonna go check somewhere else out. It was more like
I'm listening. Let me go.
yeah,
Sorry.
go for it. We wanted to make sure that it was done correctly, even though for us our journey didn't start off too correctly. I mean, for most of your audience, they probably don't know that me and Ali have been married for 7 years, and our son is 7 years old. So do the math.
Listen, man, I'm laughing because I'm far from perfectness, but
Uh, no one's perfect.
I think a lot of people, as much as you say it, like a lot of people don't understand that that's the case, right? Nobody's
Yeah.
perfect. I don't know what's going on with the water system, man. But we'll just do
Yeah,
this.
for sure.
So you feel like you guys feel you're at home now?
Oh, for sure.
Another one.
Yeah, we definitely feel are at home. We definitely feel like we're being used mightily, and definitely moving in such a direction that it. What's going on at SC Reach is definitely something that's very unique. I don't want to say that no church is doing it
Mhm.
or it was happening in the church, but it's very far few between, and it's great to see. It's very humbling to know that we're a part of it. That we get to see it happen. And the Remnant podcast being an extension of that, because not everybody's gonna be able to make it out to the church. So it's like, oh, this is like what we're learning. So this is what we're gonna extend out to you guys.
Mm.
You know,
And you've been going there for how long?
uh, 1, 2, so 4 years now. 4 years. Yeah,
That's awesome, man.
it's been quite a journey. And the crazy part about it was just like everything that me and Ali were able to learn from that journey to end up at City Reach. It was, I mean, at first it felt like it was, hurtful, but then after it's like, no, we took and learned, and this is what we're not gonna do. Like if we're gonna portray Christ, we want to make sure that we portray him to the full letter.
When did it start feeling like home for you? Because I'm
Uh,
sure you guys weren't. You didn't just walk in and be like, "Hey, what's
no,
up?"
it took us like a good month, almost a month and a half before it felt like home. And it's like once it felt like home. It was like boom, just jumped into serving. There's small things here and there, but you know, it did feel like at home once we started serving and becoming a part of the community, being part of the church.
And you served there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my roles there are many, but my main roles are uh, one of the leads for security, and I'm also the armor bearer for our executive pastor.
What does that mean?
So as an armor bearer, it's taken from the Old Testament.
Hmm.
As you may or may not know, like from the story of David, uh, King Saul, he had an armor bearer, so he wasn't always by himself. So anytime that he would go into battle, like the king wasn't gonna be full with his armor full on before going into battle because that'd be tiresome.
Yeah,
So
carrying around a
yeah,
medal.
so he would have somebody else carrying it for him, hence bearing the armor for him to have it ready whenever he was ready to go fight. And it's just that's what you do for your pastor. It's like you're there in the battle spiritually, and then physically you're there. Making sure that when they're preaching or they're meeting with somebody that they don't have to like think about doing other stuff like go get coffee or where the Bible is and different things like that. So that's essentially what the role of a armor bearer does, like making sure that the pastor is covered at all times.
Hmm. That's cool, man. Well, what are you reading in your own personal devotion?
Right now, I'm jumping between the Book of Acts and Romans, which I mean I know they're like back to back books, but also then jump into a little bit of the Psalms as well, just to because to me I just felt led like this is like the season that we're in as a church, like the Book of Acts, how that came about, especially in chapter 2, and then like what the Book of Romans, like Paul just depicting like how it is to basically conduct yourself as a Christian, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like not to be ashamed of the gospel and to be able to like, fully live out your life as a Christian, but sacrificing your flesh because it's no longer you who you live for, but you live for Christ.
Right. And how do you think that looks like? And we talk about like all Christianese fancy words, but what do you think
Yeah.
that? Sorry about the burn, my
Oh, that's all right.
guy.
Actually, I like the burn. It lets me know my life.
Oh, here we go.
I know, right?
I need to feel pain to feel
Yeah.
something.
Feel the burn.
So how do you think that plays out in everyday life?
Everyday life is, I mean, it's very simple and very practical, but yet for a lot of believers, it seems like it's almost not difficult or impossible to do, but it's kind of like throwing the back burners, waking up, getting in prayer, and making sure that you kill your flesh,
Mm.
meaning that your wants are not what comes first.
I was reading this book about that. It was essentially saying, I'm not going to give you the full thing because I can't remember it,
I mean, neither
but
do I.
but it was saying, living for Christ. I want to do that. Living for Christ, it isn't looking at the things that you can't do, but rather by doing so, you're saying like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, because I'm a Christian or because whatever the Bible says this.
Mm-hmm.
Rather, we should live in a way where it's not that I can't do this, but because I can do something other that would honor God more. That's
Well,
the route we should take.
I mean, one way you could put it too is our pastor mentioned this in the episode too is all things are permissible,
Mhm.
but not all things are beneficial to you.
Right.
So what is it that you're thinking of doing? Is it going to benefit you in your walk with Christ? Is it going to benefit you in your relationship with your spouse? You know, like what does it do for you, or does it just please you and gratify you instantly for yourself? You know what I mean? Like for me, I've have found more freedom and restrictions than I ever did when I was out in the world, man. Meaning, like me restricting myself from viewing certain things, watching certain shows. I have found more freedom because now it's like I'm taking up that time to be with my wife, be with my kid, or doing something else that would be eaten up by watching certain shows.
And not even, I agree. And not, I think it goes past that too. And that's what I'm talking about, like this negative view as opposed to like a positive view. It's not necessarily that like things are bad per
Mm-hmm.
se, even though some are. I'm not saying they aren't. What I'm saying is what you're saying is we could probably be more productive if we don't watch a certain show or if we don't waste an hour, watching YouTube or going down a rabbit hole of some videos or
Right,
you
for
know what I mean? It's
sure.
like we could plan out our days better, right?
And not to say the temptations are there, but I say that I have more freedom within the restrictions because now I'm not surrounded by those temptations. Like in meaning like the temptations from my old life.
Mm.
Like I was telling Louis too, it was like, man, in my past life, like I belong to the streets, man. Like this should have not. I'm like I was a hoe, and so I have to I have to choose to restrict myself from viewing certain things because we're being honest. Like sin is fun. That's what attracts to our flesh.
Hey, we're
It,
not in the business of being honest around here, right?
oh,
I need
okay.
you to tell me something sweet
Okay.
today.
You want the sweetness?
No thanks. I'm
Uh,
good.
and so that's where that choosing to restrict um, brings more freedom because now it's like I don't have to worry about this temptation because I'm not putting myself out there
You're
to
not
be
feeding.
tempted.
You're not feeding the dog of temptation.
Right.
You're trying to feed the righteousness, and
Exactly.
which is a fancy word of saying something that's God honoring, right? And it's going to benefit not just you but everybody around you.
Exactly. But it also you have to be honest with yourself. Like you have to know your flesh. You can't just do it and like, oh, all right, this worked out for Johnny, so I'm gonna do it too. Not because what works for Johnny doesn't work for Danny, and what
Mm.
works for Danny doesn't work for Johnny.
God's personal, man.
Exactly.
It's
And so
personal.
you have to tailor those restrictions to you. You have to be honest with yourself with what your flesh and what your temptations are. Now, if you want to sweep those under the rug and be all secretive about it, then you're gonna find yourself in a really bad situation real quick. And it's like it's gone to such a place where people end up losing their families over it. Where I mean, the sad thing to say, like they've chosen to take their own lives over it. But again, it's being honest with yourself, giving yourself the opportunity to be vulnerable, and having somebody that can hold you accountable. And I'm not talking about like a parole officer, like, oh, this is what I'm gonna do today, and this is what I'm gonna do tomorrow. No, like when you're having those weak moments, you reach out, like, hey, you know what? Um, I saw a homegirl walking down the street today, and you know what I mean. Like, it caused me to want to go watch this. Like,
Yeah.
are you free to chit chat for a little bit? Because I ain't trying to go down that route.
So it's talking with people who you feel are close to you
It,
within a certain aspect, right? Like, because
no,
you could go talk to anybody, right? You could find
yeah,
somebody
no,
on the
they
street
they have
who
to
would want to listen
be
to you.
they
But
have
what
to
I'm saying
be
is like you have
forward,
to find people who you feel close enough who are gonna lead you towards the right way as well.
right? You have to examine your walk. You have to examine their walk, and that it leads up to like I'm gonna trust this person with every aspect of my life.
Hmm.
Like every single thing that I ever done or are gonna do,
Hmm.
I trust them with it. That they're gonna hold it to themselves, but they're gonna hold me accountable. Like they know the password to my phone, kind of deal.
That's a scary thing, man. If you're talking about, this culture of everybody thinking that they got themselves right, like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, then that flies across the face of that whole ideology. So,
It
how,
does.
how do you, how did you find these people?
Falling on my face.
Falling.
Like no, like legit, like messing up, falling on my face, tripping on my own boots because my bootstraps were loose. And reaching out because I needed help. Like,
Let me ask you, how hard was that first step
oh, it
of
was
reaching out?
extremely excruciating. But I knew it's either I reach out and let them know, like, hey, this is what I'm going through, and this is what happened, or I hold it to myself, try to put it all together myself, and probably lose my family.
Mm.
It's like, so what am I gonna do?
Doesn't it make you think, like, how crazy is that? And I'm not in any way, shape, or form judging because I have my own problems, but it
I feel
makes
like you're
you
judging me right
it
now,
makes you
Johnny.
think about, like, sorry man, I tend to have that effect sometimes. It makes you think about like people who do choose themselves over the family, like for instance, like deadbeat dads. Like how, like after having kids, how could you not want to be a part of that? Kids is like,
Well, you have to go back to the root. That deadbeat dad, did he have a dad? And then that deadbeat dad's dad, did he have a dad?
right.
So
What?
evidently, when you start going down the line, you see that he didn't have an example of what a dad was.
Mm-hmm.
So he was scared. I mean, yeah, you have two extremes of the spectrum, though. You have the one where like my dad was a deadbeat dad, so I'm not gonna be a deadbeat dad to my kids. And then the other one was like, well, this is what he did, so I'm gonna do it too.
Where do you draw the line where it's like, yes, they probably have a history, right, of not having a dad, per
Mm-hmm.
se, and breaking that where you can't use that for an excuse anymore. Because at some point you have to be responsible and
It,
adult. You can't blame everything on what you might have had or might not have had.
what are we talking about somebody that it's willing to step up, or are you talking about like just excusing them? Oh, this is the reason why they did it.
I'm asking you
Well, that's what I'm
that.
saying.
Yeah,
Well,
because
you gotta
we're talking about people who, for whatever reason, you're talking about the root, checking the
right.
roots. Because
So it's like
like I
not
said, everybody has a story. So I mean,
right, not giving you like saying examine the root
mm,
for an excuse, but the reason why they did it.
right.
So now it's like, is he like coming back into the picture or not? Like that, it's so many variables. But at the end of the day, it's like you have to give grace. You have to give mercy,
Mm,
and it's in that you hope that this person chooses to surrender to selfishness.
mm.
Like not to surrender to selfishness, but to surrender that selfishness and be selfless.
Dropping everything over here.
Um, we have an effect on people,
Oh man.
but so that's where like you gotta look back and like how far like well
Mm. Uh-huh. Go ahead.
how much mercy did God give you? How much grace did God give you before you came?
That's a tough question, man. Like I said, I'm not here to judge anybody. I'm just because I think about people that I know who, for whatever reason, they didn't have a dad, but still continue down that path. It's like, how long can you milk that? I'm not saying it's not real hurt and that doesn't play a serious effect, or
Oh, you can milk it really far, man. You can
but
milk it real good.
I'm like, how long can you play yourself though? Like let's say you grew up eating McDonald's because that's what your parents can afford, but now you're an adult with two jobs and you still choose to eat McDonald's. Like, how much of it is still your parents' fault?
Well, and that point is no longer. Well, now you're asking a different question because now you're asking like, is he doing that out of choice or is he doing that out of an excuse because that's what his parents did? Evidently, we all make a choice. So now it's a choice. He's making a choice based off of what he knows. But now is he wanting to learn something new? That's where it's like the real question is like, are we teaching so that they know different? Or as a community, is the church, Big C Church, willing to reach out to these men to teach them different? because it's happening within the church walls too. Isn't it
I
just like out in the city and the community?
I'm under no illusion that it's us versus them mentality.
Right,
God starts in the person first.
right,
Starts in His church first.
of course. And so, if you have men that are willing to reach out to these young men to teach them different, then that's when you'll see the change.
Out of your opinion, why do you think that isn't the case?
Mm. I feel I've seen and I feel because of pride. Simple word pride.
As far as what?
Everything. Because if you're teaching this man that yeah, this is not the way to do it, it's because you're putting your pride aside. You have to actually put your pride aside and say, I'm willing to help you. I'm gonna be vulnerable with you so you know how to do different. I'm gonna put my pride aside and say, oh, I've messed up in this area too, so this is how I came out about it. You know what I mean? So pride and ego within the male community has been a big poison. Because of our pride, we haven't reached out for help. Because of our pride, we haven't said, hey, this is what hurt me. This is where the areas that I need to grow in because I was hurt as a kid. Because of pride, we haven't taken the time to say, I need to grow in these areas. How do I come about it? We haven't given ourselves the chance to learn more, to be more, to grow together. That's why.
Hmm. It's a good note to end on, man.
Yeah.
Thanks for
I
coming through, my guy.
appreciate you, Johnny.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.